All right, gang. Welcome again to the weekly Mac Forum video chat. This is the July 5th edition. It's a long weekend, Independence Day weekend here in the States, and hope you all enjoyed your celebrations. Canada Day is approaching for our Canadian friends. Don't worry, I won't try to sing the Canadian national anthem. I was going to bust out with a chorus of "Oh Canada," but if I do that, you guys will probably have me arrested for torturing Canadians or something. So we won't be doing that. Anyhow, this week, kind of a short set of things to take care of, wrap up a few things, and a couple of tips and tricks. A couple of things primarily related to the new Apple Music service this time. Uh, we'll talk about that a little bit. We'll mention something that they're doing in Chicago to try to tax internet services. Is going to affect particularly streaming things such as Netflix. Well, that's open. That's kind of up in the air. That's just starting, and businesses are still trying to figure out how they're going to respond to that. And there are some lawyers that seem to feel that this tax might be illegal. That's open for discussion. We'll talk a little bit about that. We won't spend a lot of time on it because, frankly, I'm still getting up to speed on it myself. But let's just dive right in and see what happens. We're up to 304,545 members. That's up almost 600 from last week. But we're up 599 from last week. And our newest member, welcome to our newest member, looks like Discavroku. Sorry if I mispronounced that. That's quite a big jump. Last week, I think we had jumped something like 112, 113 numbers. This week seems like if I did the math correctly, we were up 600, almost 600 members. So welcome to all of our new members. Hope you find some interesting information. You'll certainly find a helpful group of people. There's a sticky on the forum that you might want to read. First of all, our community rules. That's not usually a big problem. Most of our members don't have a problem complying with the rules. They're pretty basic and basically pretty simple net etiquette. But the other thing that you might find, there's a sticky on writing a quality post. It has some tips for the kind of information you generally need to complete in most of your posts when you're trying to ask for problems. It's basic things like your machine configuration, specifications for the machine, including the version number of whatever piece of software is giving you a problem, describing the problem in as much detail as you can. We realize that a lot of our users are either new to computers or new to Macs and aren't always going to know the easiest terminology or the right places to look for this kind of information. That post will help you a little bit. And the only reason we encourage that so much is that we've seen a number of posts over the years where sometimes it takes several posts to get the information that we need. And the quicker that we can get that relevant information, the quicker we can go about finding an answer for you. This week, a lot of our information as far as tips, tricks, etc., has to do with Apple's new music service. We'll get to that in just a second. I have also a tip that got left out last week. Dave and I got to talking last week, and in the process of talking a little bit about movies and which Blu-rays might be worth getting in enhanced high definition if you didn't already have them, we did not mention something that Rob Lefevre over at Cult of Mac had mentioned about his some tips that he had for the difference between um, focusing and video on a still shot versus camera video on your iPhone. So that's something that you'll want to take a look at. I'll post a link to it. We'll summarize it in just a bit when we get to that part of the show. We'll get to that part of the rundown. So quite a bit to deal with, so let's get going here. First of all, the in Chicago, city authorities there have taken a look at two rulings from their local tax people, local city government, and they are applying a tax that would affect streaming services such as Netflix, etc., and online database services. Some people have referred to this tax as puzzling because up until now, the basic assumptions about taxing the web have kind of not really dealt with these local taxing issues. But it is going to, as it stands right now, unless it's challenged, it's going to add about 9% to things like Netflix. They've already had to make adjustments. So a streaming bill that would cost you $100 in one area of the country may bring you up to $109 if you're inside the Chicago area. So that's still kind of up in the air. Companies are still figuring out the mechanics of how they're going to handle that. That it affects not only things like Netflix, but a lot of other cloud-based services. And the interesting thing about this is one of the questions that's come up legally is if Chicago can do this, will you see not only states, other cities, other states doing it, but in theory it could be applied anywhere. So I'm sure that's going to be an issue. It would not surprise me if this is not in court for quite some time, but as of now, it looks like they're going to be collecting that for the foreseeable future. This week, I'm going to go ahead and dive right into, I didn't collect a lot of other Apple news because of the release of the music service, and I wanted to take a little time talking about some of the issues that come up with that. First of all, Apple has, as some of you know by now, they've rolled out 10.10.4, the update to Yosemite. That's already out. It's out of beta, and it's in final release form. iOS 8.4 rolled out. I've got it on my phone. I haven't put it on the iPad yet. It's not installing on my iPad right now. I think primarily because my iPad is only like 1 gig or so from the form. I'm waiting for iOS 9. I'm hoping that comes along pretty quickly, because one of the changes to iOS 9 is when you've got an iPad that is close, or an iOS device, whether pad or phone, that is close to full, you probably won't have to connect it to iTunes to complete the install. There's going to be some mechanism in place there to make it easier to do over-the-air install or take up less space as it's doing that. So I'm hoping for that. In the meantime, I haven't really spent a lot of time troubleshooting why 8.4 hasn't installed on my machine yet. But the bigger thing to come out of 8.4 and was also pushed out, a new version of iTunes came out, 12.2, which is includes links and info on their new music service, their streaming music service that Apple mentioned during the keynote in June. That's out and available for people to poke around and play with. It has a 3-month trial. The trial is, I believe, $9.99 for an individual, and it's $14, almost $15 for the family plan, which allows multiple devices to take advantage of the features. Those features kind of include, it's kind of like rolling up iTunes Match, which had already existed, and social media in terms of following these bands and all of that, and also giving you access to ways to discover a lot of other music that isn't currently in your collection. iTunes Match depended on matching music that was already in your collection to music that was available in the iTunes store, so that you could stream that music and not have to have it all on your device. It was really aimed at mobile device users. That was the idea. Well, this new music service takes it one step further, because between the social component of following bands and some of the other things that they changed, it was to make it a little bit easier to discover music that you wanted to stream. And of course, it's on a subscription model. So when you stop subscribing, any of the music that way would stop. Whereas with iTunes Match, you've always had your existing music to go back on if you decided to stop with that service. So there are some things that you need to be aware of. First of all, I want to point out some people are finding the interface a little confusing. And particularly for people who are used to the old method on iOS devices, organizing their music by genre, you can get those buttons back, because that has been changed a little bit with this new music service. I haven't really played around with it yet. I'm having to some extent rely on what others are saying, but you can get that old layout back to some extent. And here's what you kind of have to do. It took people a couple of days to figure this out, but if you click on the artist tag, you see a drop-down menu there with all of the other things that you used to use, genre, and all the other things that we're accustomed to seeing in the music app. It's not so much that's necessarily harder as much as it is people didn't know initially to go and look for it. So some of those features are still there. They're just a little hidden. You have to poke around a little bit to find them. A couple of the other things that have come up, if you are really interested in Apple's new music app, the boys and girls over at Cult of Mac have come up with a series of articles on various issues related to the new music app, and some things that you probably need to know about it. And I'm going to link to those. I didn't go through all of them because, frankly, I ran out of time before the show. But one of the things that I did want to be sure that I mentioned is, let me see if I can find that note. Give me 1 second. One of the things that I wanted to point out to you, some people have noticed or have reported that hooking up with the new service wrecked their iTunes library. Artwork got switched around. Some things, it was almost like some things had been tagged the wrong way. And this either, depending on whose version you read, was a function of the new service or a function of the shift to iTunes 12.2. There's been some discussion of this in the Apple discussion forums if you go over to that site. But here's one of the things that some people are finding helpful. First of all, I would suggest anytime you're going to upgrade iTunes, update iTunes, make sure that you have a backup of your iTunes content, certainly. The content usually doesn't get messed up, but it's always a good idea to have a backup. And then also, in your iTunes media folder, in your iTunes folder, is a series of files, or about 4 or 5 files. They're essentially parts of the database that iTunes uses to track all your tags and how you have everything organized. Back up those files. They're small files, they're relatively small files. They don't take up a lot of time. But sometimes if you have an update that kind of messes up your library, it's not the tracks themselves that are messed up, it's something in this database. So you'll want to back this up. Now, if you've already updated to the new iTunes and it's messed up some of your tracks, here's one fix that a user proposed. It's discussed in detail over at Cult of Mac. Came from a user on the Apple discussion forum. I'll have a link to the article in the show notes. But essentially, you're going to go into your iTunes folder, and you're going to look for an ITL file, a library file, from a previous iTunes library. Okay. When you find that file, what you're gonna need to do, really, probably, is to load this file from a backup. I hope you have a backup of that file, because what you can then do is take the existing file, which presumably is corrupted, rename it, and then replace the file that you renamed with the one that's known good from your most recent backup. So that's yet another piece of evidence that you need to be sure that you're keeping a backup of your stuff. In iTunes, I thought of this right before I went on the air. Essentially, when you're talking about backing up iTunes, you've essentially got 3 issues going here. There are really 3 components that work together, and they all have to be worked in good shape for things to function well. The first component is the iTunes app itself. If you've got problems, and there are lots of little files that compose that iTunes app. Most of the time, you never have to look at those files. That's 99% of the time, that's not an issue that's causing most users problems. Second component is your content. If you want iTunes to behave at its best, make sure that your content is well organized and tagged appropriately, etc., etc., etc. And make sure that there is a backup of that content. Because as we mentioned before, although Apple allows you to re-download content that you've purchased, sometimes that content is no longer available in the iTunes store, and that can cause some issues with being able to re-download it. So you want to make sure you have a good backup of your content. And the third component, as we saw in that tip, is those iTunes library files. Those files, there are 3 or 4 of them. I don't remember exactly how many. As I say, I thought of this about 2 minutes before the show went on. And they are components of the database that iTunes uses to track your things like your content, track your artwork, track all of that information, such as play counts, all of these things. So what you've got essentially with iTunes is a media player with the various codecs and everything baked into the program, the content, and then tying that whole mess together is this series of database files. And that, to me, more than anything, is the heart of iTunes. If those last 2 components get corrupted, you start having some problems. Because the main program, you can always download it easily from Apple. But that's not going to get you your content back. It's those database files and the content that you really need to be careful of and make sure that you have good working backups of. So I'll have a link to that fix in the show notes. And in what I've been doing the last couple of weeks is I will post the show notes in the forum thread, and then underneath on my Google Plus page on where we host the Mac Forum podcast video cast, I've had the link to the Mac Forum page, and we're going to keep that up. It causes less hassle, and there's less possibility of error between the two. Another little tip that I picked up with reference to the music files. You've heard me mention before Kirk McLaren, the guy who is sometimes referred to as the Macworld iTunes guru. Leave it to Kirk to come up with something that might be important for some users. And I just discovered his iTunes-related forum today, so I'll probably be perusing that later this evening and checking it out, because it looks like there's a lot of good information there. And if it holds up that the information seems to be pretty good and reliable, I'll post a link to it in a future show. But one of the things that he mentions, Kirk kind of summarizes a couple of things that for him are the big differences between iTunes Match, which was the existing music service, and the new service that they just rolled out. Okay, and here's the things that he mentioned, and these are the two things that I think are a really big deal and need to be paid close attention to. Both of the music services match your iTunes library and store your purchases. Both of them allow you to access those files and listen to them on multiple devices. So even iTunes Match and the current system both track your purchases, match them so that they would be available, and then made them available so you could listen to them on multiple devices. Okay? Here, as long as you had the iTunes Match subscription. Okay, here's what's different. Okay, with iTunes Match, when you downloaded a file that had been matched or uploaded a file, you get either the iTunes Store Match copy or the copy that iTunes uploaded of your original file. So let's say I upload one of my files using iTunes Match. Then it went out and looked at the iTunes store, looked for that track. If it could not find it, then it would take the copy that I uploaded as the copy that got streamed back down to me. That's okay. Here's what's going on now with the new system, or what appears to be going on. When you match and download a file from iCloud Music Library, okay, and you don't have an iTunes Match subscription, you get files that have DRM included. In other words, it's, I believe, DRM Fairplay 2, which is Apple's current digital encryption. Okay, so a file that would have been uploaded without DRM, if you were just using iTunes Match, appears to come back down with a DRM if you're using the new iTunes iCloud Music service. This is something that only becomes an issue if you stop paying the $10 a month subscription fee, okay? So you do need to be aware of that, and you might want to, if this is a big issue for you, you might want to hang around a little bit until that gets sorted out. Because if that is what's happening, as it appears to be, and I'll link to his article because he gives some pretty convincing examples of why he thinks that's happening. If that is what's happening, that's certainly going to upset some folks. So you might want to keep an eye on that until we know for sure, one way or the other, exactly what's going on there. The Cult of Mac current site has several things related to iTunes Music, the new iCloud music service. Because I did not get a chance to preview all of them before the show today, I won't be discussing all of them, but the articles that I did get a look at look pretty good. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. It's got some information that I think is going to be pretty useful to you if you're looking at making the switch and going beyond the trial period, the 3-month trial period. For myself, I'm kind of up in the air about it. I don't really, how do I put this? The social tracking functions, I don't know that I would necessarily be that heavy a user of. I'm not a big social media person. I don't tend to follow bands on social media, so I don't know that that would be much of a difference. The ability to use it as a means of locating or identifying, if you will, new artists might be interesting. So for me, it's just going to be a function of would I use it enough to carry it beyond the 3-month trial period? Haven't tried it yet to be, to see. I might be experimenting with that in the coming days and weeks. One of the things, if I remember correctly, that is in the Cult of Mac series of articles is a reminder of some easy ways to stop the auto pay, because once you get past the 3-month trial period, the $10 a month subscription is auto billed until you tell them to cancel it. Now, they're not hiding that. A lot of music services and a lot of other internet services do that these days. It's not exactly what I would call hidden, but some people may forget about it. Cult of Mac tells you, has a few tips in their sequence. I can tell you one of the things that I would do, and I will probably do if I decide to try the 3-month subscription. It just dawned on me as I was sitting here talking to you, one of the things that I would probably do, if I started that trial today, I would figure out when my first auto bill comes due. And I'd put a calendar reminder in iCal or a note in reminders that pops up a day or two before that and reminds me to make a decision about it, and then to either continue or cancel. The reason I say a day or two, or maybe even a week or so, let's suppose you haven't used it a whole lot in 2.5 months. Well, that might mean that you don't really need it and you can stop paying the subscription. But let's assume that you really haven't used it just because you haven't really had time to play with it. You might decide, hey, in the next week, I need to take a look at this and see if it's worth it. That gives you a couple of days to play with it and then make a decision and then either continue or cancel as your needs go. And that way you don't forget about the fact that you're coming out of that trial period. All right, this has been a pretty good collection of stuff. As I said, we'll include a few more things in the show notes, but that after I've had a chance to go through them, look for those to come up probably either later tonight or in the morning. But one of the things I want to be sure that I get to is something I mentioned last week before Dave and I started our conversation. It was really nice to have Dave on last week. One of the things that we did not get to because we kind of detoured over into movies and a discussion of the benefits of Blu-ray versus regular discs for some, especially if you're an older movie fan. Some of the stuff, the 30s, 40s, and 50s. We talked about that, and we did not get to this tip. Rob Lefevre, in an article over at Cult of Mac, I've quoted him a couple of times, as you know. He writes some really good how-tos and tips and tricks. This is a tip that I believe dates back to 2013. And I had not seen this anywhere, in part because I'm still getting used to using my phone as a camera. You would not believe how many times I've gone to a family gathering or something or other, and we thought to myself, gee, I wish I had brought a camera. And completely forgetting that I have the iPhone camera in my pocket. And the camera on the 6 Plus is better than what I had in either the 3GS or the 4S. So, but I still sometimes forget about the camera. One of the things about that camera, and I know because I've triggered this a couple of times by accident, there have been a couple of times where I've intended to, particularly in the iPhone 4 days, where I've intended to trigger a still shot and triggered a video instead, just because I wasn't paying attention. I was kind of in a hurry, wanted to be sure I get the shot. And you may find sometimes when you shoot a video with your iPhone camera, the video may be a little fuzzy and just not as good as you would like. And Rob points out that one way of getting rid of the blurriness that some people see in iPhone videos, that blurriness seems to be due to the fact that the autofocus and auto exposure features seem to be geared toward still photography. Okay, in other words, the default modes for autofocus and auto exposure seem to work better for still photography than they do for video. If you know you're going to be shooting video, you can change this a little bit to some settings that may be a little more beneficial to you. And he has some tips for how to do that. It's 4 steps. I'll just kind of breeze right through them, and I'll put a link in the notes because it's a little easier to follow along if you have them in front of you as you're trying to do it until you get used to this. First of all, you're going to activate this lock when filming, okay? Launch the camera app on your phone and make sure it's set to video. Next thing you do is you tap and hold the area on the screen where you want to set the focus and exposure to. Find a point in the video where find a point in the scene. You say, I want you to focus on this. And by tapping and holding on that area, that's essentially what you're telling the focus function. I want you to focus primarily on this area. So you're going to tap and hold it. Now hold that tap until you see the auto exposure and autofocus lock icon show on your screen, okay? At this point, the focus and exposure will be set to the values of whatever you have tapped on, okay? And you're going to need to stay basically in the same place. It's not going to dynamically shift, okay? It works based on the distance away from the lighting environment of the subject that you choose. So when you tap that function and lock that focus onto a certain part of the scene, it seems to be assuming that the lighting is fairly consistent and the distance is fairly consistent. So if you're moving around, now taking a step or two may not make a difference, but if your distance is changing significantly one way or the other, closer to it, farther away from it, it's probably going to have some problems. Autofocus in general does that. There are some autofocus functions on dedicated cameras that handle it a little bit better. But when you look at the cameras and say at the autofocus in say a lot of point and shoot cameras, and particularly a lot of phones, you see this kind of behavior. As long as you are looking at a scene that is fairly evenly lit and you're staying roughly the same distance, you're okay. But when you start shifting distances and exposure, the cameras have a harder time adjusting to that. So as I say, I'll put a link to that in the notes so that you can see in a little more detail what he's talking about. It's a quick read. As I say, I think it dates back to about 2013, but I had not seen this tip anywhere. It should certainly be of help if you have an older phone, and I bet it's, even with an iPhone 6, I'd give this a test and see if you like the results better. Whether it's helpful to you is going to depend a lot on how you shoot video, the kinds of video that you shoot in terms of your lighting environment, distance from it, etc. If it's pretty consistent for you, you're probably already getting good results. That's, if you notice, some of the Apple commercials that have been running here in the U.S. for the iPhone, which includes video that has been shot on the iPhone, that video is pretty good. And I bet you that that's because the person behind the camera has had some experience with shooting video. And if you look from time to time, you can see video on the internet that's been shot with an iPhone that looks really good. So in addition to testing out Rob's tip to see if it works for you, take some time, play around with your camera. Don't wait until grandma's 95th birthday party to experiment with the settings. You know, experiment with them on junk footage that you don't really care about if it comes out horribly. And, you know, experiment with the settings and see if you come up with something that works a little bit better for you, works in a lot of the environments that you don't use. All right, guys, it looks like we've run just a little over half an hour. I know sometimes we run about an hour. Tonight, I'm going to cut it off right about at this point because, as I say, we did not get through all of the tips that I would like to have read through. I'll be posting the stuff that we talked about later tonight, or probably more likely early in the morning, so I can get a chance to read through those other cloud music related tips. And I hope that you've enjoyed this edition of the Mac Forum Sunday video chat. We'll be back next week with more tips, tricks, and information. I hope that you will join us then. And until then, this has been your host, Sylvester Rock, aka Sly Dude on the Forum. We'll see you next week, and hopefully you'll have a good Mac week in your life.